My daughter-in-law went to her parents' house and asked me to look after her 7-year-old son. I made dinner, but he just sat there watching. I asked, "Why aren't you eating?" He replied, "Am I allowed to eat today?" and immediately began to cry. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My house smells of lemon oil and old books, a combination that has always to me smelled like peace. It's a comfortable sprawling craftsman in Silver Spring, Maryland, the kind of house with a deep front porch and floors that creak with the weight of a lifetime of memories. Since my husband Robert passed, the silence can sometimes be a heavy thing, but it's a gentle silence, a quiet that holds no fear. This house is my sanctuary, and I have come to realize it is also a sanctuary for my grandson. My name is Beatrice Holloway, but the only person who calls me that is the man from the IRS. To the world I am Beat. For 40 years I was a social worker for Child Protective Services in Montgomery County. I have seen the darkest corners of the human heart, the ugly secret wars that are waged behind the closed doors of seemingly perfect families. I have spent a lifetime developing a kind of sixth sense for the subtle, terrifying language of a child in pain. It is a skill I have learned, but you can never truly retire from. My grandson, Leo, is 7 years old, and he is the sun around which my entire world now orbits. He is a quiet boy, an old soul, his teachers say. He has his father's kind eyes and a serious, watchful nature that is all his own. When his parents, my son David, and his wife Crystal, drop him off for our weekly sleepover, he arrives like a small, tightly coiled spring. He is polite, he is quiet, and he is achingly, unnervingly still. But then, the magic happens. Over the course of a few hours, in the quiet, unconditional safety of my home, the spring begins to uncoil. The watchful, anxious look in his eyes softens. The stiff posture of his little body relaxes. We will sit on the floor of my living room, surrounded by a glorious, chaotic mess of Legos, and he will begin to talk. He'll tell me about school, about the dream he had, about the fascinating world of leafcutter ants, and then, if I am very lucky, I will hear the most beautiful sound in the world. His laugh. A real deep, carefree belly laugh. The sound of a little boy who has for a moment completely forgotten to be afraid. It is in these moments that my love for him becomes a sharp physical ache in my chest. And it is in these moments that the quiet professional part of my mind, the part that can never fully turn off, begins to ask the questions I don't want to answer. Why is this laughter so rare? What is he so afraid of? And why does my beautiful, brilliant, and seemingly perfect grandson only ever truly seem like a child when he is here, with me in the sanctuary of this old, quiet house? My son David is a good man. He is a successful architect, a loving husband, and in his own slightly distracted way, a loving father. He has his father's gentle heart, but lacks his iron will. He is a man who avoids conflict, who seeks the path of least resistance. His work often requires long hours and frequent travel, and he has, I fear, abdicated the day-to-day business of parenting almost entirely to his wife. His wife, my daughter-in-law, Crystal, is a force of nature. She is beautiful. She is brilliant. And she is one of the most ambitious people I have ever met. She is a high-level marketing director at a competitive DC tech firm, a woman who moves through the world with a sharp, polished, and utterly relentless efficiency. She runs her home the same way she runs her corporate department, with meticulous planning, a focus on performance metrics, and an absolute, non-negotiable demand for perfection. On the surface, they are the perfect family. They live in a stunning, minimalist modern house that has been featured in design magazines. They drive expensive, silent cars. Their son Leo is always impeccably dressed. His grades are perfect and his manners are flawless. They are a testament to the new, successful black elite of the DC suburbs. A perfect aspirational portrait. But I have spent a lifetime looking at family portraits, and I know that the most perfect ones are often the ones that are hiding the most profound and disturbing cracks. My concerns about Crystal's parenting have been small things, a collection of quiet, unsettling observations that I have always dismissed as my being old-fashioned, as a generational gap in parenting philosophies. I have seen the way she speaks to Leo, her voice never rising to a shout, but taking on a low, cold, and deeply disappointed tone that seems to make my grandson shrink in on himself. I have seen the rigid, almost military-style schedule she keeps for him, a minute-by-minute accounting of his day that leaves no room for the messy, spontaneous joy of childhood. I have seen the way her affection is transactional, a reward for good behavior, a thing to be earned, not a thing that is freely given. Once I had gently tried to broach the subject with David. We were at their house for dinner and Leo, who was 5 at the time, had accidentally spilled a glass of milk. Crystal hadn't yelled, she had simply given him a look of such profound cold disappointment that the little boy had burst into tears. She had then, without a word, sent him to his room for the rest of the evening. Later I had said to David, "Honey, don't you think she was a little hard on him? He's just a little boy, accidents happen." David had given me a weary, dismissive smile. "Mom, that's just Crystal's way," he had said. "She's a perfectionist. But you have to admit, it works. Leo is the best behaved kid in his class. Just let her handle it. Okay? She knows what she's doing." And so I had let her handle it. I had quieted the worried professional voice in my head. The voice of the social worker who was seeing a pattern of emotional control and rigid perfectionism that was deeply, deeply concerning. I had quieted that voice because the alternative, the thought that my own son was blind, or worse, complicit in a pattern of emotional abuse towards his own child, was too monstrous to contemplate. And so I had chosen to believe in the perfect facade. The phone call came on a Friday afternoon. It was Crystal, her voice the smooth, efficient and slightly condescending purr she always used when she was about to ask for a favor. Darling," she began, her use of my first name a subtle but clear marker of our peer-to-peer, not mother-to-daughter-in-law, relationship. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all, Crystal," I replied, my own voice warm and grandmotherly. "I was just doing some weeding in the garden. What can I do for you?" "Well," she said with a small theatrical sigh, "David and I have been invited to a last-minute overnight trip to my parents' place in Virginia. It's a very important networking event for my father's firm. We simply can't get out of it, and of course our regular nanny is unavailable. I was wondering if you might be able to look after Leo for us tonight, at our house." "Of course, dear," I said immediately, my heart giving a little leap at the prospect of an unscheduled night with my grandson. "I would be happy to." "Wonderful," she said, the relief in her voice so profound it was almost insulting, as if there had been any doubt that I would agree. "You are an absolute lifesaver. Now there are a few things you need to know. I'll email you his full schedule. Of course, but it's very important that you stick to it. Routine is everything for him." For the next 10 minutes she laid out in a barrage of rapid-fire non-negotiable instructions, the military-style operation that was my grandson's evening. "Homework is from 5 to 6, no exceptions," she began, her voice the brisk, efficient tone of a CEO outlining quarterly objectives. "He is to read for exactly 30 minutes after that. An approved book, of course. No comics. At 6:30, he has his evening core, which is to wipe down all the baseboards in the main hallway. He missed a spot last week, so please, be sure to inspect his work." I listened, a cold, familiar knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Wipe down the baseboards. For a 7-year-old, dinner is at 7 sharp, she continued, oblivious to my silence. "I've left a healthy, low-carb, gluten-free meal for him in the fridge. Please ensure he eats all of his kale salad before he is allowed to have the grilled chicken. And absolutely no dessert. We are not rewarding mediocrity." Sorry. The phrase, so cold and so corporate, applied to a 7-year-old's dinner, was jarring. After dinner he is to practice his piano for 30 minutes. The metronome should be set to 80 beats per minute. I will know if he has rushed it. Then he is to lay out his clothes for school tomorrow, brush his teeth, and be in bed with the lights out at exactly 8:30. Is that all clear?" "Crystal clear," I said, my voice a flat, hollow thing. It was not a schedule, it was a prison timetable, a detailed, minute-by-minute plan for the institutionalization of a 7-year-old boy. "Perfect," she said, her mission accomplished. "We'll be back tomorrow around noon. And B.A. Thank you again. I just don't know what we'd do without you." I hung up the phone, the cheerful, empty words echoing in the quiet of my kitchen. I looked at the beautiful, vibrant and slightly chaotic mess of my own garden outside the window. And I thought of my grandson, in his sterile, minimalist and perfectly ordered house, and my heart ached for him. He was a beautiful, vibrant and slightly chaotic little boy, and his own mother was trying to prune and trim and shape him into something that was neat, and orderly, and completely, utterly joyless. I arrived at their house that evening to find a small, silent and deeply anxious little boy waiting for me. Leo was sitting at the large, marble kitchen island, a stack of homework papers in front of him, his back ramrod straight. He was a miniature adult, a tiny, 7-year-old sentry guarding a fortress of unspoken rules. "Hi, Grandma," he said, his voice a quiet formal thing. He did not get up to hug me. "Hi, my sweet boy," I said, my voice warm and gentle. I came over and kissed the top of his head. He smelled of clean, expensive soap. "How was school?" "It was fine," he said, his eyes not leaving his math worksheet. "I have to finish this by 6. I looked at the schedule Crystal had taped to the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator. It was even more detailed and more oppressive in person. Every minute of his life, it seemed, was accounted for. I spent the first hour in a state of quiet, simmering rage. A silent observer of my grandson's highly regulated life. At precisely 6 o'clock he put down his pencil, his homework finished. He then without a word went to the hall closet and retrieved a dust rag and a spray bottle, and began the absurd demeaning task of wiping down the baseboards. I watched him, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. This was not discipline. This was a form of quiet, soul-crushing control. Finally at 6:30, when his chores were done and he was standing in the middle of the silent, immaculate living room, waiting for his next set of instructions, I decided that this was my house for the night. And in my house we had different rules. "You know what, Leo?" I said, my voice a cheerful conspiratorial whisper. "I have a secret for you. That schedule on the fridge? It's invisible tonight. Tonight we are operating on Grandma time. And on Grandma time, the first rule is that we have to build a magnificent Lego castle." He looked at me, his big serious eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning fearful hope. "But, Mom said I was in charge." I corrected him gently, "and the person in charge has declared that it is officially Lego o'clock." It was like watching a flower open in time-lapse. The rigid, anxious posture of his little body began to soften. A small, hesitant smile touched the corners of his lips. For the next hour we were not in a sterile, minimalist house. We were in a magical kingdom of our own making. We sat on the floor, a glorious, chaotic explosion of colorful plastic bricks spread out around us. We built a magnificent castle, with towers and a drawbridge, and a fearsome three-headed dragon guarding the gate. And Leo, my quiet, serious old soul of a grandson, began to transform. He began to talk. He told me a long, intricate story about the king who lived in our castle. He gave the dragon a funny, booming voice. He was no longer the silent, watchful sentry. He was a little boy. A happy, creative, and deeply imaginative little boy. And then it happened. I made a silly growling noise for the dragon, and he laughed. Not a small, polite chuckle. A real, deep from the belly, can't catch his breath laugh. The sound was a pure, unadulterated miracle. It was the sound of a child who had for a moment been given permission to just be a child. I looked at his happy, carefree face, and my heart swelled with a love so fierce it was almost a physical pain. And the cold professional voice of the social worker in my head, the voice I had been trying so hard to ignore, whispered a cold, hard, and undeniable truth. "This is not normal," it said. "A child should not have to be given permission to laugh." After the glorious and triumphant battle in which the dragon was defeated by a brave Lego knight, I looked at the clock. It was after 7. We had completely ignored the rigid, tyrannical schedule taped to the refrigerator. A small, rebellious thrill went through me. "Well, my brave knight," I said, my voice full of a theatrical grandeur, "I believe a hero of your stature deserves a victory feast. Are you hungry?" He looked up at me from the colorful wreckage of our Lego kingdom, his eyes shining. "Starving," he declared. I had, of course, completely ignored the healthy, low-carb, gluten-free meal that Crystal had left in the fridge. I had seen the sad, plastic-wrapped piece of grilled chicken, and the small, joyless container of kale salad, and I had made a command decision. Tonight, my grandson would not be eating a punishment. He would be eating a celebration. I had brought the ingredients with me. From my bag, I produced a box of elbow macaroni, a block of sharp cheddar cheese, a stick of butter, and a container of the crispy garlic herb breadcrumbs I made from scratch. His absolute, all-time favorite meal in the world. A meal his mother had deemed nutritionally bankrupt. "Is that?" he whispered, his eyes wide with a reverent awe. "That, my dear Sir Leo," I announced, "is the legendary dragon-slaying homemade macaroni and cheese, and tonight we shall feast upon it." He let out a little whoop of pure unadulterated joy. The kitchen, which had been so sterile and silent, was suddenly filled with the warm, comforting sounds and smells of a real home. The clatter of the pot, the bubbling of the water, the rich, sharp scent of melting cheddar cheese. Leo sat at the kitchen island, his little legs swinging, a happy, chattering narrator to my cooking process. He was a different child, a child at ease in his own home for the first time. I slid a heaping golden brown and gloriously cheesy bowl of the macaroni and cheese in front of him. The crispy breadcrumbs on top were a perfect toasted gold. It was a bowl of pure, unconditional grandmotherly love. "There you go, my sweet boy," I said, sitting down opposite him with my own much smaller bowl. "Eat up." And then the strangest thing happened. The happy, laughing, carefree little boy vanished. He was replaced in an instant by the quiet, anxious, watchful sentry who had greeted me at the door. He just sat there, his hands in his lap, and he stared at the steaming, delicious bowl of food in front of him. He didn't pick up his fork, he didn't move. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, my own fork pausing halfway to my mouth. "Is it too hot?" He shook his head, his gaze still fixed on the bowl. "You're not hungry anymore?" He shook his head again. He looked afraid of the very food he had been so excited to eat just moments before. A cold, sick feeling of dread began to uncoil in the pit of my stomach. I leaned forward, my voice a gentle, worried whisper. "Honey, what's wrong? Why aren't you eating?" He finally slowly lifted his head and looked at me. His big, beautiful brown eyes were not the eyes of a 7-year-old. They were the eyes of a much older and much sadder person. They were filled with a terrible, anxious, and deeply adult-like uncertainty. He swallowed hard, and his voice when he spoke was a small, trembling, and utterly heartbreaking whisper. A question that should never ever come from the mouth of a child. A question that stopped my world on its axis, that shattered my heart into a million pieces. "Am I allowed to eat today?" And then, as if the very act of asking the question had broken some terrible dam inside of him, his perfect, beautiful little face crumpled, and he began to cry, not the loud, angry tears of a child having a tantrum, but the silent, hopeless, and utterly devastating tears of a person who has just given up. The sound of my grandson's silent, hopeless weeping was the only sound in that vast, sterile kitchen. It was a sound that seemed to be absorbed by the cold marble countertops and the gleaming stainless steel, a small, private grief in a world that was not designed for it. In that moment, the 68 years of my life, the 40 years of my career, all of it seemed to have been a preparation for this one single, terrible moment. The grandmother in me, the soft, loving part of my heart, was screaming, a silent, primal roar of pure, unadulterated rage and grief. My first instinct was to scoop him up, to run out of that cold, loveless house, to take him back to my own sanctuary and never ever let him go. But the other part of me, the part that was a professional, the part that had spent a lifetime dealing with the ugly, secret realities of child abuse, took over. That part was cold. That part was calm. And that part knew that my own emotional reaction was a luxury I could not afford. Leo did not need a hysterical grandmother right now. He needed a social worker. He needed an advocate. And to be his advocate, I needed facts. I needed evidence. And I needed to be very, very careful. I pushed my own chair back, came around the island, and knelt before him. I did not try to make him stop crying. I just pulled him gently from his stool and into my arms, holding him close, my hands stroking the back of his head. I let him cry. I let him feel the full, crushing weight of whatever secret he had been carrying, and I let him know that he was safe to let it go. He clung to me, his small body shaking with silent, racking sobs, his tears soaking the shoulder of my blouse. We stayed like that for a long time, just a grandmother and her grandson, a small island of comfort in a sea of unspoken horror. When his sobs finally began to subside, I gently tilted his chin up, so I could look into his tear-stained, beautiful face. "Leo, my sweet boy," I said, my voice a low, calm, and incredibly gentle whisper. I had to be a safe harbor for him now, a place where he could speak the unspeakable. "Can you tell me why you asked that question? Why would you not be allowed to eat?" He looked at me, his eyes wide with a fear that was not of me, but of the words he was about to say. He was afraid of betraying his own mother, of breaking a rule that had been so deeply ingrained in him. It's Mommy's rules," he whispered, his voice a raw, shaky thing. He looked towards the schedule on the refrigerator as if the piece of paper itself were a watchful, judgmental eye. "What rules, honey?" I prompted gently. "It's okay, you can tell Grandma, you are safe with me." He took a deep, shuddering breath. And then in a small, quiet, and utterly devastating voice he explained. He told me about the chart in his room. He told me about the stickers, the gold stars for good days, the red X's for bad ones. And he told me about the consequences. "If I get a red X," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the floor, then I'm not allowed to have dinner." The clinical matter-of-fact way he said it was the most heartbreaking part of all. This was not a shocking, unusual event for him. This was just a rule. A normal, if unpleasant part of the architecture of his life. A red X? I asked, my voice a miracle of calm I did not feel. What do you have to do to get a red X, sweetheart? His little face, already so full of a sorrow that no 7-year-old should ever know, seemed to crumple again. If I forget to do my baseboards, he whispered. Or if I get a B on a spelling test. Or if mommy says my tone is disrespectful. The reasons were so arbitrary, so cruel, so utterly out of proportion to the punishment, that I felt a wave of pure black homicidal rage wash over me. I wanted to find my daughter-in-law, that perfect, ambitious, and deeply, deeply sick woman, and I took a deep breath, pushing the rage down. The rage would not help Leo. And what happens the next day? I asked. My voice still a whisper. After you don't get your dinner? He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a fresh wave of tears. Sometimes, he said, his voice cracking, if mommy is still mad, I'm not allowed to eat until lunch. Withholding food, using a child's most basic primal need for sustenance as a tool of punishment and control. It was one of the oldest and cruelest forms of abuse in the book. It was a classic, terrifying signature of a parent with a profound and deeply dangerous personality disorder. And my son, my own son, was married to it, and my grandson, my beautiful, precious grandson, was its victim. The moment the full, ugly, and unforgivable truth of the situation was laid bare, the grandmother and me, the one who had been weeping and raging and wanting to scoop up her grandson and run, went silent. She retreated, and in her place a woman I had not been for 2 years but who had never truly left me, awoke. B. Holloway, CPS senior field agent, was back on the clock. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of emotion, became a cold, clear, and deeply strategic place. The objective was no longer just to comfort my grandson. The objective was to save him, and to do that I needed a plan. I needed evidence, and I needed to be very, very careful. My first move was to re-establish a sense of normalcy for Leo, to show him that in this house with me, the world was a safe and predictable place. Leo, I said, my voice now a calm, warm, and deeply reassuring thing. I gently wiped the tears from his face with my thumb. Thank you for telling me. You were so brave to tell me. Now listen to me very carefully. The only rule in Grandma's house is that we eat when we are hungry, and that macaroni and cheese looks like it's getting cold. What do you say we demolish it? For the first time that evening, a small, watery but genuine smile touched his lips. He nodded. I sat him back on his stool, and I watched as he slowly and hesitantly at first, and then with a ravenous, desperate hunger began to eat. He ate the entire heaping bowl. And then he looked at me, his eyes full of a hopeful, fearful question. Grandma? He whispered. Can I have some more? Honey? I said, my heart breaking all over again. Tonight, and every night you are with me, you can have as many bowls as you want. After he had eaten his second bowl, and after we had, in a quiet act of loving defiance, shared a bowl of ice cream for dessert, I knew I had to get him out of that house. Out of that cold, sterile, and deeply poisonous environment. You know what, Sir Leo? I said, my voice a cheerful conspiratorial whisper. I think the Lego dragon has put a sleeping curse on this castle. I think we need to retreat to my fortress for the night. What do you say to a sleepover at Grandma's? His eyes lit up. Really? Can we? Absolutely, I said. It's an emergency, a Lego dragon emergency. The most serious kind. I helped him pack a small, overnight bag, my mind racing the entire time. I knew I couldn't just take him. I had to create a plausible story, a story that would not raise Crystal's suspicions. I found my opening in the kitchen. On the counter was a small, almost invisible puddle of water, a leak from the ice maker in their ridiculously expensive high-tech refrigerator. It was perfect. I used my cell phone to call David. Not Crystal, David. He was the weak link, the one who could be managed. David, honey, I said, my voice full of a convincing grandmotherly panic. I'm so sorry to bother you, but something's happened. The ice maker at your house has sprung a leak. A big one. There's water all over the kitchen floor. I've turned off the main valve, but I really think you should have a plumber look at it first thing in the morning. And I don't feel comfortable with Leo sleeping here. With the water and the wet floor. I'm just going to take him back to my place for the night. Just to be safe. The lie was a masterpiece. It was domestic. It was mundane, and it was full of a practical motherly concern that he would never question. "Oh God, really?" he said, his voice a groan of annoyance at this new, unexpected household problem. "Okay, Mom. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for handling it. Just make sure he gets to bed on time, okay? Crystal will be upset if his routine is off." "Don't you worry, darling," I said, my voice a sweet, poisonous thing. "His routine will be the last of her worries." I hung up the phone. I had my alibi. I had my grandson, and now it was time to go back into that house, alone, and gather the evidence I needed to burn my daughter-in-law's world to the ground. After I had tucked Leo safely into the guest bed at my house, a small contented smile on his sleeping face for the first time all night, I drove back to their cold, silent home. I let myself in with the key they had given me, and the house felt different now. It was no longer just a place of quiet, simmering unease. It was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. My first stop was Leo's bedroom. The room was a testament to Crystal's obsession with order and control. It was immaculate. The books on the shelf were arranged by size. The toys were in neatly labeled, clear plastic bins. There was not a speck of dust, not a single stray Lego to be seen. It was the bedroom of a 7-year-old boy who had learned through a cruel and systematic process of conditioning that messiness was a punishable offense. And there it was. On the wall, next to his small, perfectly made bed, was the chart. It was a large, beautifully designed behavior and rewards chart. The kind you could buy at an upscale educational toy store. It was laminated, with clean modern graphics and a space for each day of the week. But in Crystal's hands, this tool of positive reinforcement had been twisted into a weapon of systematic emotional abuse. I stood before it and I felt a cold, professional rage settle over me. This was not a star chart. This was a ledger of a child's alleged crimes and a justification for his mother's cruelty. The chart was divided into columns: chores, homework, attitude, and meal status. Under each day there was a series of small colored stickers: gold stars for a day of perfect robotic compliance, green checks for mediocrity, and the red X's, the symbols of his failure. My eyes scanned the past month. There were a lot of red X's. Under Tuesday, in the attitude column, was a red X, and next to it, in Crystal's perfect, elegant, and utterly damning script, was a small note: disrespectful tone to mommy. And in the final column for that day, meal status, was another red X with another even more chilling note: dinner privilege revoked. I felt my stomach clench. The casual corporate language of it. Privilege revoked, as if a child's basic human right to be fed was a perk, a bonus, a thing that could be taken away for a perceived lack of respect. I scrolled back through the weeks. The evidence was all there. A meticulous, horrifying record of her cruelty. A red X for a B+ on a math quiz, with the note: did not try his best. Dinner privilege revoked. A red X for a messy room. Dinner privilege revoked. A red X for crying over a scraped knee, with the note: lack of emotional control. Dinner privilege and the next day's breakfast revoked. It was systematic, it was calculated, and it was, in the cold, clear, and unforgiving language of the law, a pattern of willful, malicious child abuse. I took out my phone. My hands were shaking, but not with fear, with a pure, righteous, and deeply focused rage. I began to take pictures. I took a wide shot of the entire chart. Then I took close-ups of every single red X, of every single damning, handwritten note. I made sure the photos were clear, that the flash didn't glare, that every single ugly word was perfectly legibly preserved. This was my primary source. My incontrovertible proof. This was the weapon I would use to save my grandson. As I was about to leave the room, my eyes fell upon a small framed photograph on Leo's nightstand. It was a picture of me and him, taken in my garden last summer. We were both laughing, our faces full of a pure, uncomplicated joy, and in that moment, I made a silent, solemn vow to the little boy in that picture. I would get him back. I would get that laughing, carefree, joyful little boy back, even if it meant I had to declare war on my own son. I left their house that night with a cold, hard knot of evidence on my phone, and an even colder, harder knot of resolve in my heart. The loving, slightly naive grandmother who had walked into that house just a few hours before was gone forever. In her place was a woman with a mission, and that mission was to dismantle the perfect, fraudulent, and deeply abusive world my son and his wife had built. My first strategic move had to be to confirm my son's ignorance, or more accurately, his willful blindness. I had to know if he was a co-conspirator in this monstrous system of discipline, or if he was simply a negligent, oblivious fool. The future of my relationship with him, if there was to be one at all, depended on the answer. I waited until the next morning. I made sure Leo was happily occupied with a new set of watercolor paints at the kitchen table before I stepped out onto the back porch to make the call. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the slightly meddling, slightly overbearing but ultimately harmless mother he was used to. He answered on the third ring, his voice distracted, the familiar sound of him typing in the background. "Hey Mom," he said. "What's up? Is Leo okay?" "He's wonderful, honey," I said, my voice a warm, gentle purr. "He's painting a picture of a rainbow-colored tiger. He's having the time of his life." Good, he said, his relief palpable. He had already moved on, his mind back on his work. "I was just calling about last night," I began, my voice taking on a note of gentle grandmotherly concern. "That water leak was quite a mess. But you know, while I was there I couldn't help but notice Crystal's schedule for Leo. It's very detailed, isn't it?" I let the question hang, a soft, non-threatening opening. "Oh yeah," he said with a small, weary laugh. "That's Crystal for you. Captain of the ship. She runs a tight one, but hey, you can't argue with the results, right? The kid is polite. He gets straight A's. He's perfect." Perfect. The word was a stab to my heart. My grandson was not perfect. He was a terrified, anxious little boy who was being systematically starved as a form of punishment. "I know, honey," I said, my voice still a gentle probing thing. "But the rules about his meals, they seem a little strict, don't they? I mean, to not get dinner just for a bad grade?" This was the moment. The direct question. His answer would tell me everything I needed to know. His response was a sigh. A deep, tired and deeply dismissive sigh. "Mom," he said, and his voice was now laced with the familiar, patronizing tone of a man who is tired of his mother's old-fashioned worrying. "Crystal handles all that. The discipline, the schedules. It's her department, and honestly I don't have the time or the energy to second-guess her. She's a perfectionist, you know that. But it works. Leo is the best-behaved kid in his class, so let's just trust her process. Okay? She knows what she's doing." And there it was. The answer. He was not a co-conspirator. He was something almost worse. He was a blind, negligent and deeply complacent accomplice. He had seen the rigidity, he had seen the lack of warmth. But he had chosen to look away, because it was easier. Because it worked. Because it produced a perfect, well-behaved child who did not cause him any trouble. He had, in his quiet, passive way, abdicated his primary responsibility as a father to protect his own child. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice a sweet, poisonous thing. "You're right. I'm just a silly old-fashioned grandma. I'll let it be." I hung up the phone, a cold, terrible and deeply sorrowful certainty settling over me. I could not save my son from his own weakness. But I could, and I would save my grandson from the consequences of it. My son had chosen his side, and now I had to choose mine. The next morning was a Sunday, and I decided to make it the most beautiful, rebellious and love-filled morning of my grandson's young life. While he was still asleep, I went to work in my kitchen. I made a batch of my famous from-scratch pancakes, the ones that were so light and fluffy they were like eating a cloud. I fried up a platter of crispy, thick-cut bacon. I squeezed a pitcher of fresh orange juice, the house filled with the warm, happy and deeply unapologetic smells of a real, joyous breakfast. It was a declaration of war, fought with butter and maple syrup. When Leo woke up, his eyes went wide at the sight and smell of the feast spread out on the kitchen table. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice full of a reverent awe. "Are we having a party?" "We are, my sweet boy," I said, scooping a massive golden brown pancake onto his plate. "We are having a party to celebrate the fact that, in this house there are no rules about food. Except one. You have to have at least 3 pancakes." He giggled. A real happy, carefree sound. And for the next hour we sat at my table and we ate. He ate 3 pancakes, 4 pieces of bacon and drank 2 glasses of orange juice. He was a little boy who was finally simply being allowed to be hungry, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The calm before the storm. That's what this beautiful, perfect morning was. I was girding myself for the battle to come, filling my own heart with the love and the joy of my grandson, reminding myself of what and who I was fighting for. Crystal and David arrived at noon, exactly as they had said they would. They walked into my home and the first thing I saw was the flicker of annoyance on Crystal's face as she saw the remnants of our magnificent rule-breaking breakfast on the kitchen counter. "Pancakes, Bea?" she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too sharp. I hope you remembered his gluten sensitivity. He did not have a gluten sensitivity. It was another of her invented controlling rules. "Oh my," I said, my hand flying to my cheek in a perfect theatrical gesture of grandmotherly incompetence. "You know, in all the excitement, I completely forgot. But he seems to be just fine." Leo, who was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by a glorious mess of Legos, looked up and gave his mother a bright, happy and slightly syrup-sticky smile. The sight of her son, so happy, so relaxed, so normal, seemed to displease her on a fundamental level. I played my part to perfection. I was the loving, slightly dotty, and completely harmless grandmother. I gave them a glowing, detailed report of Leo's wonderful and entirely fictional adherence to his schedule. "He was an angel," I said, my voice full of a convincing, effusive pride. "He finished his homework. He did his chores. He was in bed at exactly 8:30. You two have raised the most well-behaved boy I have ever seen." They beamed, their faces alight with a smug parental pride. They were so confident in their system, so certain of their own superiority, that they were completely blind to the cold, hard and deeply dangerous truth that was sitting right in front of them, smiling. They gathered up their son, who the moment they walked in the door had transformed back into the quiet, still and watchful little sentry. His shoulders were tense again, his laughter was gone. "Thank you again for holding down the fort, Bea," Crystal said as they were leaving, her voice once again the smooth, professional purr of a woman who believes she has successfully managed her subordinates. "Any time, dear," I said, my smile warm and sweet and full of a secret terrible knowledge. "Anything for my family." I watched them walk down the porch steps. My perfect fraudulent family. The calm was over. The storm was coming. And I was about to make it rain. I waited a day. A calculated, strategic, 24 hours. I wanted them to settle back into their routine, to feel secure in their perfect, orderly and deeply abusive world. I wanted them to believe that the weekend had been a success, that their secrets were safe, that the slightly dotty old grandmother had been successfully managed and put back in her box. Then, on Tuesday afternoon, I set the stage for the final act. I called them, my voice full of a warm, grandmotherly enthusiasm. "Hello, darlings," I began. "I know it's last minute, but I was just at the farmer's market, and I found the most beautiful short ribs. I was thinking of making your father's old recipe for Sunday dinner, the one with the port wine and the figs. I know it's your favorite. David, would you three be free to come over?" The invitation was a carefully crafted lure. Sunday dinner at my house had been a weekly tradition for years, a ritual that had in the past few months of their escalating self-absorption fallen by the wayside. By invoking their father's memory, by appealing to my son's nostalgia, I was creating an invitation that they could not, without appearing deeply callous, refuse. "Oh Mom, that sounds amazing," David said, his voice warm with a genuine, uncomplicated pleasure. The memory of his father's short ribs was a powerful one, a connection to a simpler, happier time. "I think we can make that work. Let me just check with Crystal." I heard him talking to her in the background, his voice a low, excited murmur. I heard her muffled and distinctly unenthusiastic reply. But in the end his nostalgia won out over her social calendar. He came back on the line. "We're in, Mom. Sunday at 6, we can't wait." "Wonderful, darling," I said, my voice a perfect instrument of maternal joy. "It will be just like old times." I hung up the phone, a cold, grim satisfaction settling over me. The trap was now set. The rest of the week was a blur of quiet, methodical preparation. I was no longer just a grandmother planning a family dinner. I was a general planning a battle. I went to the market and bought the best short ribs I could find. I polished my best silver. I ironed my best linen tablecloth. The dinner had to be perfect. A beautiful, loving stage set for the ugly, terrible truth that was about to be revealed. Then I made the most important call of all. It was to an old dear friend, a woman who had been my colleague and my confidant at CPS for 30 years. Dr. Alafia Williams. She was now the director of the entire division, a woman of immense power, integrity, and a finely honed bullshit-proof sense of justice. "Alafia," I said, my voice low and serious. "It's Bae. I need your help. I have a case, a bad one, and it's personal." I told her everything, the story of my grandson, the whispers of my own concerns, the heartbreaking revelation and the cold hard photographic evidence of the chart. I told her about my son's willful blindness, about my daughter-in-law's monstrous systematic cruelty. The silence on the other end of the line when I was finished was the silence of a professional who is processing a horrific but all too familiar story. "Beat," she finally said, her voice a low, angry growl. "I am so sorry. I know this must be tearing you apart." "It is," I said simply. "But my own heart is not the issue here. The issue is a 7-year-old boy who is being systematically starved and emotionally abused by his own mother. I need an official intervention, Alafia, but it needs to be handled delicately. I don't want to traumatize Leo any more than he already has been." "I understand," she said, her voice now all business. "A quiet, informal but officially documented home visit. I will handle it myself." "When and where?" "My house," I said, "this Sunday. At 6:15. They think they are coming for a family dinner." "A family dinner," she repeated, a note of grim professional admiration in her voice. "Bea Holloway, you have not lost your touch. You are setting a beautiful, elegant and deeply effective trap. I will be there, and I will be ready." Sunday arrived. A crisp, beautiful autumn day, the kind of day that feels full of promise. My house was filled with the rich, savory aroma of short ribs slow braising in port wine and figs. It was the smell of home, of tradition, of a deep and abiding family love. It was a complete and utter lie. I had spent the morning with Leo, who I had picked up for our usual weekend visit. We had raked leaves in the backyard, our laughter echoing in the cool, clear air. He was happy. He was safe. He was blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over his young life. I had arranged for a trusted neighbor, a retired kindergarten teacher, to watch him for the evening. I would not have him present for the confrontation to come. This battle was for him, but it would not be fought in front of him. At 6 o'clock sharp, David and Crystal arrived. They were the very picture of a successful, happy couple. David, in a casual but expensive sweater, presented me with a bottle of wine. Crystal, in a chic minimalist dress, gave me a fragrant bouquet of lilies. Their performance of normalcy was breathtaking in its audacity. "Something smells incredible, Mom," David said, his smile genuine and warm. He was in this moment the loving son, the man who was truly looking forward to his father's favorite meal. He was a man living completely in the fiction of his own life. "I hope you're hungry," I said, my own smile a perfect, welcoming mask. I led them into the living room. "We're just waiting for one more guest." A flicker of annoyance crossed Crystal's face. "A guest? Beatty, you didn't tell us you were having company. I thought this was a family dinner." The implication was clear. The presence of an outsider would ruin her ability to manage and perform. "Oh, she's an old dear friend of mine," I said, my voice a breezy, dismissive thing. "I'm sure you'll love her. She's just so passionate about her work." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. I walked to the door, my heart a slow, steady and powerful drumbeat in my chest. This was it, the moment of no return. I opened the door, and there she was. Dr. Alafia Williams. She was, as always, impeccably and formidably dressed in a sharp, tailored suit. Her expression was one of polite, professional calm, but her eyes, her sharp, intelligent and deeply perceptive eyes, were taking in everything. "Alafia," I said, my voice full of a convincing, joyful surprise. "You made it. Come in. Come in." I led her into the living room, where David and Crystal were now standing, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and a slight, social anxiety. "David, Crystal," I said, my voice bright and cheerful, "I'd like you to meet my dear friend, Dr. Alafia Williams. Alafia, this is my son, David, and his wonderful wife, Crystal." I watched as the color drained from Crystal's face. She was a smart woman. She was a well-connected woman. She knew who Dr. Alafia Williams was. She was not just an old friend. She was the director of the Montgomery County Child Protective Services Division, and she had just been invited to dinner. The change in the atmosphere of my cozy, welcoming living room was instantaneous and profound. The air, which had been filled with the warm, savory scent of short ribs, and the pretense of a happy family gathering, was suddenly thick with a new, cold and deeply official tension. David, in his blissful ignorance, simply saw a powerful and influential woman, and his instinct was to impress. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched, a charming professional smile on his face. "Dr. Williams," he said, "it's an honor to meet you. My mother has spoken of you often. Please, come in. Can I get you a drink? Crystal, however, was frozen. Her face, which had been a mask of polite social grace, was now a pale, tight mask of pure dawning horror. She knew this was not a social call, the name, the title, my calm, smiling demeanor. It was all beginning to add up in her sharp, calculating mind. And the answer was a terrifying one. Dr. Williams shook David's hand, her grip firm, her smile professional but utterly devoid of warmth. A pleasure to meet you both, she said, her gaze sweeping over them. A quiet, powerful assessment. And thank you, David, but I'm on duty this evening. I won't be drinking. The phrase on duty was a small, perfectly placed bomb. It shattered the last, lingering pretense of this being a social occasion. David's smile faltered. He looked from Dr. Williams's impassive face to his wife's terrified one, and then to me, his own face a mask of dawning confusion. On duty? He asked. Mom, what's going on? Why don't we all sit down? I suggested, my voice a gentle, soothing thing. I gestured to the armchairs. Dinner can wait a few minutes. The family dinner had now officially become an intervention. We sat in the living room, a tense, silent tableau. I sat in my favorite armchair. David and a pale, rigid Crystal sat on the sofa opposite me, and Dr. Williams took the chair between us, a position of calm, neutral authority. She placed her leather satchel on the floor beside her. As I mentioned to your mother, Dr. Williams began, her voice a calm, professional instrument that cut through the thick, anxious silence. I am here this evening in an official capacity. My office received an anonymous tip regarding a potential child welfare issue. A tip that, given its specific and detailed nature, we are required by law to follow up on. A child welfare issue? David sputtered, his face a mixture of shock and outrage. What on earth are you talking about? That's insane. Our son Leo is a happy, healthy, and perfectly well cared for little boy. I have no doubt that he is, Mr. Holloway, Dr. Williams said, her voice still maddeningly calm, but the report we received was quite specific. It concerned certain disciplinary methods, specifically regarding nutrition and meal times. She turned her gaze, her calm, perceptive, and deeply unnerving gaze, onto my daughter-in-law. Miss Holloway, she said, her use of Crystal's maiden name a subtle but clear signal of a professional, not familial relationship. Could you please walk me through your family's policies regarding discipline and meals? The trap was now sprung, and Crystal, the brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless marketing director, was about to give the most important sales pitch of her life. And she was about to fail. Miserably. Crystal was a shark in the corporate world, a master of spin, of manipulating narratives, of selling a beautiful, compelling story, regardless of the underlying truth. And in that moment she brought all of those skills to bear. She launched into a performance that was, in its own terrible way, a work of art. She did not get angry. She did not get defensive. Her face softened into a mask of wounded, misunderstood motherhood. Her voice became a low, sorrowful, and deeply convincing murmur. Dr. Williams, she began, her eyes shining with unshed, crocodile tears. I can't imagine who would make such a cruel and baseless accusation. David and I, we love our son more than anything in this world. Everything we do for him. She spoke of the challenges of modern parenting, of the dangers of a permissive society. She painted a picture of herself as a mother who was simply trying to instill discipline and a sense of responsibility in her son. In a world that had gone soft. Yes, we have rules, she conceded, her voice a symphony of reasonable maternal concern. Leo is a brilliant boy, but he is sensitive. He can be prone to emotional outbursts. We have found that a clear, consistent structure is what works best for him. A system of rewards and consequences, a star chart, if you will. It helps him to understand the connection between his actions and their outcomes. And what are the consequences, Ms. Holloway? Dr. Williams asked, her voice still a quiet, relentless probe. If he has a particularly difficult day, Crystal explained, her gaze never wavering, if he is disrespectful, or if he refuses to do his homework, then yes. Sometimes he loses a privilege. No television for an evening, an earlier bedtime. On rare occasions, if the behavior is particularly egregious, he might lose his dessert. She delivered the final lie with a flourish of masterful understatement. He might lose his dessert. The punishment was so mild, so commonplace, so utterly reasonably normal. She was brilliant. She was almost believable. David was completely taken in. I watched as the confusion on his face was replaced by a look of proud, righteous indignation on his wife's behalf. He was ready to leap to her defense, to decry this entire proceeding as a slanderous bureaucratic outrage. But before he could speak, I made my move. I did not say a word. I simply reached into my handbag, took out my cell phone, and slid it across the polished surface of the coffee table to Dr. Williams. The screen was already on, the photo album open. Dr. Williams picked up the phone. She looked at the first image. It was the wide shot of the behavior and rewards chart on Leo's bedroom wall. Her professional impassive expression did not change, but I saw her knuckles whiten slightly as she gripped the phone. She swiped to the next photo. A close-up, the red X for a disrespectful tone, and the chilling, handwritten note in Crystal's perfect script, dinner privilege revoked. She swiped again, the red X for a B-bomb, on a math quiz. Did not try his best. Dinner privilege revoked. She swiped again, the red X for crying over a scraped knee. Lack of emotional control. Dinner and breakfast privilege revoked. Photo after damning photo. A meticulous, undeniable, and utterly horrifying record of a mother's systematic, cruel and calculated abuse of her own child. Dr. Williams was silent for a long, terrible moment, her eyes fixed on the screen. The only sound in the room was the soft, frantic breathing of my daughter-in-law, whose beautiful, carefully constructed lie had just been brutally and very publicly murdered by the truth. Finally, Dr. Williams looked up. She looked past the pale, horrified face of my son, and she fixed her cold, hard and utterly unforgiving gaze on Crystal. And she said, in a voice that was no longer a probe but a verdict, "Miss Holloway, I believe you and I need to have a very different kind of conversation, and I believe we need to have it now." The photographs were a bomb, and the fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect loving family did not just crack, it was instantly and irrevocably vaporized, leaving only the raw, ugly and undeniable truth of their dysfunction. David stared at the phone in Dr. Williams's hand, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. He looked from the damning handwritten evidence of his wife's cruelty to her face, which was now a pale, tight mask of trapped, cornered rage. "Crystal," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. "What is this? Dinner privilege revoked? What does that mean?" Crystal, seeing that the game was up, that her beautiful, reasonable lies had been shattered against the hard, cold wall of the truth, did what all cornered narcissists do. She attacked. She did not turn on me. She did not turn on Dr. Williams. She turned on my son. "What does it mean?" she shrieked, her voice a high, ugly and deeply revealing sound. "It means I am the only one in this house who is actually parenting. It means I am the one who has to deal with his moods, his laziness, his constant disrespect, while you are off in your own little world, playing with your little buildings. You want to know what it means, David? It means I am the one doing the hard, dirty work of raising your son, and I will do it any way I see fit." It was a masterful, if desperate, act of deflection. She was reframing her abuse as a necessary, if unpleasant, form of hard parenting, and she was blaming his absence for it. And for a terrible, heart-stopping moment, I thought it might work. I saw the confusion on my son's face, the flicker of his old familiar weakness, the instinct to appease her, to smooth over the conflict. But then, Dr. Williams spoke, her voice a calm, cold and deeply authoritative instrument that cut through Crystal's hysterical performance. "What it means, Mr. Holloway," she said, looking directly at David, her gaze level and unforgiving, "is that your wife has been engaging in a systematic pattern of nutritional neglect and emotional abuse. It means that she has been using your son's most basic biological need for food as a tool of punishment and control. And it means that you, as his father and as a resident of this household, are at best a case of gross negligence, and at worst a willing accomplice." The legal, clinical and utterly damning assessment of his own failure as a father seemed to finally break through his wall of denial. He looked at his wife, at her beautiful, snarling and utterly unrepentant face, and he finally, after years of willful blindness, saw her for who she really was. A monster. The Montgomery County Department of Child Protective Services will be opening a formal investigation into this matter, effective immediately, Dr. Williams continued, her voice a final, decisive hammer blow. A caseworker will be assigned tomorrow morning. There will be home visits. There will be interviews. With you, with your wife, and of course, with Leo. She then turned to David and her voice softened, just a fraction, "And you, Mr. Holloway," she said, "will have to make a choice. A very serious and very consequential choice. You will have to decide whether you are going to continue to enable this behavior and in doing so risk losing your son, or whether you are going to do what is necessary to protect him. The choice was laid bare. His wife, or his son. His dysfunctional abusive marriage, or his sacred fundamental duty as a father. He looked from his wife's furious hateful face to my own, which was I am sure a mask of pure sorrowful love for my grandson. And then, he looked at the empty doorway, at the space where his own son should have been, safe and happy, and he finally made his choice. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, social workers, and the quiet, painful, and necessary work of dismantling a family. The formal investigation, with my photographs and Leo's quiet, heartbreaking testimony at its center, was swift and decisive. Crystal, faced with the irrefutable evidence of her abuse, and on the advice of her very expensive lawyers, moved out of the house and agreed to a supervised visitation arrangement. Her perfect, curated world had imploded, and she had vanished from our lives. A ghost of a memory, a cautionary tale of a mother who had mistaken control for love. David, my son, was a changed man. He was broken, humbled, and consumed by a guilt so profound it was a physical presence in the room. But he was also, for the first time in years, truly and completely present. He took an immediate and indefinite leave of absence from his architectural firm. His ambition, the driving, relentless force of his life, was gone, replaced by a single, quiet, and all-consuming new purpose: to earn back the trust of his son. He and Leo entered into intensive family counseling. I was not a part of it. This was their journey, their work to do, the slow, painful, and deeply necessary work of a father learning for the first time how to truly be a father, and of a son learning for the first time how to truly be a child. I saw my grandson every day. His quiet, anxious, watchful demeanor began to slowly, almost imperceptibly melt away. The laughter, that beautiful, rare, and miraculous sound, became a more frequent and more welcome guest in my quiet old house. He was healing. We were healing. The final scene took place 2 months after that terrible, fateful Sunday dinner. It was a Tuesday. I was in my kitchen, the heart of my home, and I was not alone. Leo was standing on a stool beside me at the counter, a small flour-dusted apron tied around his waist. We were making dinner together. We were making his favorite macaroni and cheese. He was in charge of stirring the bechamel sauce. His small, serious face a mask of intense concentration. The air was filled not with a tense, anxious silence, but with the easy, happy chatter of a grandmother and her grandson, with the warm, comforting scent of melting cheese, with the simple, beautiful music of a family being reborn. As I took the bubbling, golden-brown casserole out of the oven, Leo looked up at me, his eyes shining with a pure, uncomplicated love. "Grandma?" he asked, his voice a quiet, serious thing. "Can I have a second bowl tonight?" The question, so simple, so normal, so beautifully, wonderfully childish, was a testament to how far he had come. The terror, the uncertainty, the fear of not being allowed to eat, was gone, replaced by the simple, confident expectation of a child who knows he is safe, and who knows he is loved. I looked at my beautiful, precious grandson, at the little boy I had almost lost, and my heart was so full of a love so fierce and so profound, that it almost took my breath away. I knelt down in front of him so that our eyes were level. "Honey," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I no longer had to hide. "Tonight, and every single night for the rest of your life, you can have as many bowls as you want." The end. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.